The experience with being involved with Portland in 2009 as their publicity consultant was the type of experience I had been doing with some other festivals, Quebec City, Vancouver, Jazz Aspen, because by that time in 2009, for the last 20 years I was an independent marketing and PR consultant. But that year, 2009, I was concluding a long-term consultancy arrangement with Blue Note Records. And it was at that time that Blue Note was about to embark on a marketing campaign of their 70th anniversary. And I knew the festival founder very well and had suggested to him that he do a Blue Note at 70 festival. And I could make some introductions for people that I worked with at Blue Note. And that's pretty much how that relationship began. I was consulting Blue Note on public relations, and the festival founder, Bill Royston, asked me to also work on the festival and kind of tie those elements together. So I stayed with that festival, well, beginning in 2009, and as you know, I'm still with that festival today in 2014. And I've evolved to the position of managing director through the experiences of learning from Bill firsthand on how to run a festival. Bill had asked me to stay on and learn the business from him. He had said that he wasn't going to be doing this forever, and he wanted somebody to help him in the transition, and he basically mentored me in Portland in terms of how to manage a festival. And it brought me full circle because my main interest of getting into the industry back in the early 80s was to work for George Wein in particular. That was a goal, and to get involved in the production side of presenting music. So this opportunity presented itself at a time that, as the business was going through a lot of transformation, I saw this as an opportunity to get more involved in an area that I had a lot of passion for. And then after the 2011 festival, Bill retired from the industry, and PDX Jazz, the presenting organization of the Portland Jazz Festival, the board asked me if I would stay on and become not only the managing director but the artistic director. So for the last 3 years I've been programming the festival, but my main interest is really to create a year-round scene for jazz, and we're partnering with a number of venues, giving opportunities for artists who are on the West Coast who hadn't played Portland before to now be engaged and play gigs in Portland outside the festival. And there's a lot of great musicians that live in Portland too. Daryl Grant, George Colligan, who offer opportunities for artists to do workshops at Portland State. So it's a great scene to be involved with. I think that what's unique about Portland is that it's a city that a lot of young people are gravitating towards and coming to for quality of life and places where they can feel free and unencumbered in terms of a lot of the constraints of modern society. And the cost of living for a West Coast city are markedly less in Portland than, say, Seattle or San Francisco and LA. For cooks and chefs and musicians, for entrepreneurs, for designers. So you have a lot of interesting, free-thinking people that are living there now. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why the food scene has exploded there, because it's a city that cooks can come from New York, from San Francisco, and be creative and afford to live in a real thriving environment. And that's something that's appealing to a lot of jazz artists. I mean, New York, let's face it, it always has been and always will be a very expensive place to live and survive. So what's happened is a lot of great musicians have moved to Portland and have settled there. Guys like Farnell Newton, who's out on the road with Jill Scott, who's a professor at Portland State. George Colligan, who recently moved there from New York. Daryl Grant's been there for a number of years. Jeff Baker, who's there now. We actually came from the University of Idaho. Thera Memory has been out there a long time. Mel Brown, who was an important drummer during the Motown years, lives in Portland. It's a great scene. David Frischberg is there. David Friesen lives there. John Stoll, Nancy King, Glenn Moore. Todd Strait from New York is there. There's a lot of young musicians. Ryan Marr just moved from New York to Portland. Matter of fact, we're going to do a show on next year's Portland Jazz Festival called NYC to PDX Experience. And Daryl is going to organize this and have all the guys who have moved from New York play together in different situations one night. So, and a lot of the jazz artists who come to New York, or come to Portland rather, and play, they say Portland reminds us of a cleaned up version of Brooklyn. when they go to some of the historic neighborhoods like North Mississippi or the Alberta Arts District, it's very, very hipster-like. Not hipster-like, it is very hipster. And they feel very comfortable there, and they like playing Portland. So it's an exciting time to be in Portland. I mean, there's just a lot of optimism, and the housing market has turned around since when I first got there. I mean, certainly there's a pretty strong demand on places to live. The occupancy rate is very high now in Portland. The economy has definitely turned around. And you notice when you're around town, I mean, there's a lot of building going on. It's a very progressive city. It always has been politically. One of the leading cities in America for LEED certification for sustainable living and building and growth. The urban growth boundary that surrounds the city, all the light rail and trolleys that bisect the city. When Bill founded the festival, he was very curatorial in his programming with a theme approach, and he did some profound programming. ECM Record Festival, Blue Note, John Coltrane. He's brought Cecil and Ornette to Portland. Some amazing artists. When we transitioned, we decided to not be thematically driven and really hit all the major styles within jazz. NEA Jazz Masters, legacy artists, emerging artists, established artists, Latin jazz, jazz that touches world music elements, small combos, big band, vocalists. So we program with a mindset of being inclusive, more of a populist festival, also the inclusivity of local artists doing unique programs, tribute shows to iconic legends. And by offering that broad definition of jazz, we have found that we're doing exceedingly well, almost at capacity for all our shows. We're well over 80–85% capacity for our entire festival over the last 3 years. We work very closely with KMHD Radio, which is one of the few remaining 24-hour, 7-day-a-week jazz radio stations in the United States. Last year they were honored by JazzWeek.com as the #1 jazz radio station in America. They're a very supportive station. Having that type of support from a 24/7 radio station really gives you that kind of inertia that you need from the community, that really galvanizes and brings the community together. They're a great partner to have, and Matt Flieger in particular, who's the music and program director, and I work closely, and he has some really very positive input, as do some members of our board and others. We have a committee where we meet and just talk about ideas and strategies on how to bring artists to Portland that haven't played there before, like Roy Haynes. He'd never played Portland as a leader. Ahmad Jamal hadn't played Portland in 30 years till we presented him last year. So it's very refreshing and very gratifying to have artists come to Portland where we know there's a demand for because they haven't had the opportunity to play there. Because Portland, until really we started routing artists year-round 3 years ago, working with Jimmy Max, the Mission Theater, Mississippi Studios, the Old Church, they weren't getting those opportunities. They'd play in Seattle or they'd play in San Francisco, and Portland would be a flyover, except for the festival over the last 11 years. Hey, I'm Don Lucoff. For this videos and for other videos, you gotta check out jazztimes.com.